Okay, if you're new to this channel, what we do is we talk about property investing, how to get started in property without buying a buy-to-let property or having tens of thousands in your account, and telling you about how to get started in property and eventually leave your job. Today's episode is talking about social housing. It's a certain kind of strategy that you use other people's properties to make money on. Bear with, right? Stay to the very end because you'll have a very good understanding of how this works and the different ways of making money through social housing. So Dan, tell our audience exactly the different types of strategies within social housing, because it's not just one, is it?
Yeah, that's right. So there's four main strategies that I like to think of. First one, and the one that we like the most, which is sort of hands-off, best money, is going to be back-to-back leasing. So that's where we find a provider initially, we understand what their property needs are, and then we go out and find that property with the landlord. And then we take a lease with the landlord, we rent it from the landlord, and then we rent it onto the provider, and we make our money in the middle. So that's the first strategy. Once there's a lot of legwork initially, obviously finding your providers and stuff like that, but as soon as you've done that and you understand what they need, you find the landlord, and then once the deal is put together, you're essentially completely hands-off then. There's hardly any operations. You said a good thing in the past about rent social housing, and that is you get to become an expert at the initial stage of things, right? Is doing the outreach, getting the providers on board, finding the landlords, having those conversations, but you don't have to deal with so much of the other side of the businesses where it comes to all the operation, because once it's set up, it's sort of hands-off. The next one that's really good as well is management, right? So if you've got a provider, and this is good when you've got a provider that may not be open to working with you on like a back-to-back lease scenario, they need to be, for whatever reason, some providers will need to be directly to the landlord, so they'll have to sign the lease directly with the landlord. Now, you can still work with this provider and you can still find them properties, it's just knowing about how to go about it. So in this case, we would look for a landlord directly, not through an agent. So we find a landlord that's listing their property privately, and then we approach them with our offer from the provider, guaranteed rent for the next 3 to 5 years. This would be the tenant type that would be going in there. They'd be taking care of the majority of the maintenance, and for that, for you bringing that client to the table, you'll be signing a separate agreement with the landlord that states essentially that you charge a commission. So this is you acting as a letting agent effectively, right? So that could be anywhere from 10 to 15%. So the provider pays you say £3,000 in rent, you get 300, your 10% of that rent. You pass the rest on to the landlord, and then your responsibility is essentially keeping in touch with the provider and managing that relationship between the provider and the landlord. Again, because it's so hands-off working with the provider, there's very little to actually do. You'll just be doing inspections on behalf of the landlord, making sure when their safety certificates and things like this come up that you can get that booked in for them, or you can give them a warning that this needs to be done, things like that. But it's almost completely hands-off again. The third strategy would be sourcing. So say for example, you find a provider and they can offer a good deal, but they won't work with you directly, or there's not enough margin in it to get a back-to-back lease, and the landlord doesn't want to, the landlord's tight, he doesn't want to pay a commission or anything like that, he wants all the rent to himself, which is fair enough. What you do is you'll just charge the provider a sourcing fee. So you say, say to the provider, that's absolutely fine for my services to find you the suitable property, we'll be charging you a sourcing fee. Now you can negotiate on that, sort of industry standard is like 3k to find them a property. However, if it's like a block of flats or it's something, a bigger property, you could charge the first month's rent, so you could be charging a hefty fee there. And then the final sort of strategy on top of that would be a tenant find fee. So this is where you charge the landlord a sourcing fee effectively for bringing your tenant to the table. And that again, you can charge like 100 to 70% of the first month's rent. They're not going to be paying you 3k like a provider would, but you would be able to charge, industry standards are usually about 70 to 100% of the first month's rent, and landlords will be used to that, very familiar with the concept of a tenant find fee.
So quick question, because I think I know what my audience would be thinking. Let's say you've got a deal laid out in front of you. What do you go to first? Do you charge the landlord a tenant find fee, or do you charge the provider a sourcing fee? What is your go-to and why?
Yeah, so that would be based on, because we always talk to the provider first, but that's where we would figure out how we can work with this one provider. For example, if I'm speaking to a provider and I know that they can pay good rates, I'm going to be trying to find out whether they'll work with me on a back-to-back lease basis, right? Also, I'll be inquiring at that time whether they'll be comfortable paying sourcing fees. If they turn around and say, no, we need to sign leases directly with the landlord and we're not prepared to pay any sourcing fee, okay, well, there's only one other way, well, there's two other ways now that I can make money out of this. It's charging the landlord a tenant find fee, or it's management. So it's like a process of elimination based on what the provider tells you at the time when you're speaking to them. So that's my way I go about doing that. And then you're left with two strategies then, which is the tenant find and the management. And then if you go to the landlord and they're like, oh, I don't want to work with you on management, I'll just pay your tenant find fee, or vice versa, you know. Sometimes you can charge both. If the provider will pay a source fee and you're going to do a tenant fine fee to the landlord, then you can double end your fees then. You're getting a fee on the provider side and also a fee on the landlord side. So then you could be walking away with like well over 5k for sourcing one property.
There is another strategy called temporary accommodation, but we're not that keen on it, are we?
No, so yeah, with TA, it's not as reliable, and that's why I prefer the back-to-back leasing. With temporary accommodation, essentially you have a contract with the council and they're housing people on, and you're getting paid a nightly rate, right, for people that they're housing. But the contracts that you have, imagine you're signing a lease for 2 to 3 years with a landlord.
Which is very typical.
Which is quite typical, yeah, exactly that. And then you're signing a contract with the council. However, they can break that contract quite easily.
Yeah, isn't it like 2 days notice?
Well, essentially, if they don't put anybody in your property, they're not going to be paying you a nightly rate, aren't they? So, and then, yeah, I've heard stories where effectively they could give you like 48 hours notice and then no longer require that property, right? So that's very difficult to plan for and mirror in your lease with the landlord, right? So you could be left holding the bag or having to pay some sort of money back to them in compensation for exiting the tenancy early. So it's that inconsistency. Yes, it can be great for high cash flow. It's kind of like Airbnb with the council.
It's essentially exactly the same, but the council is a guest and they could just say, yeah, we don't need it anymore.
Exactly that.
And if you're relying on the council to book it,
yes,
and you haven't done your due diligence beyond the council booking it,
yes,
is anybody else going to book?
That's very true. So you make a good point. What you could do is effectively have to stack it off an Airbnb model, knowing that that is your second backup.
Your exit strategy.
You do the TA, and if that doesn't work, or the council take it back for whatever reason, because there's a lot going on in the news right now about how much councils are spending out. It's getting a lot of scrutiny about this temporary accommodation. Not that I think that they're really going to have they don't really have any other options.
No, they rely on it.
Exactly. But there are a lot of councils that would be like, no, we're not doing it anymore.
Liverpool City Council, I think it was 975,000, I want to say a month. That's crazy, it can't be. I think it was 900, I read, it was 975,000 a month.
Yeah.
Something crazy. A year doesn't sound crazy. No. This stat was crazy.
Yeah.
On temporary accommodation.
Yeah.
Just in Liverpool.
Yeah, exactly. So there's so much expenditure going at it. But yeah, councils are spending ridiculous amounts of money, and then there's worries and concerns that councils are going bankrupt, right? But yeah, but I mean, I think there is money to be made there, absolutely, but I would say that is more of like an additional boost to a stable portfolio of properties, right? Yeah. So that's why our focus is on back-to-back leasing, because it's, set it up, it's consistent, you know what you're getting every single month. The provider's paying the
guaranteed
bills. Exactly, the provider's paying the bills, they're doing the internal maintenance, you are literally just collecting the rent. So, and it's locked in for, a minimum of 3 years.
So, your latest deal, how much money did you have to put into that yourselves from your business? What about the deal before?
Nothing. Yeah.
The deal before?
Nothing.
The deal before?
Maybe a splash of paint. Yeah.
So I get asked this question a lot, is, how much money do you need to get started in social housing?
Yeah.
Aside from the training and compliance, and my answer is pretty much nothing.
Yeah.
You might need a few £100s here to do the odd job that the provider might ask you to do as a favour.
Yeah, and that's it. And that comes purely down to negotiations, not that you actually have to invest anything into the property. Like when we've got a provider that we've done, I think 3 or 4 deals with now. Their first deal that they took on was actually an old rent to HMO that we had, and they were interested in it, and we wanted to convert that over to a back-to-back lease with them. Now, it wasn't like a licensed HMO, it was an old student, so it didn't have like it had fire doors on there, but not like the closers and stuff like that. So we got that done for them, and we just give it, obviously we had like 4 lads in there, and it was run down, bit tatty, got it like professionally cleaned. We did, put new vinyl lay in the kitchen, a few bits and pieces, but that was on us, and we decided to do that.
What's your favourite strategy out of those 4?
Definitely back-to-back leasing, just because it is, it takes work to get it put together, but once it's done, like, it is just set and forget, and it's that reoccurring income. Whereas like doing fees, tenant fine fees, sourcing fees are great because you get that lump sum, but ultimately to build a business, you want to know what's coming in each and every month. The cash injections are fantastic, but it should start as your priority should be back-to-back lease, then management, and then the 2 sourcing ones after that. So, and always try to do a double-ended sourcing fee, so source to the provider and like 3k to the provider, and then the first month's rent to the landlord.
Nice.
Yeah. And then it just supercharges it.
So how do people get started? If they've just found this video, this is the first time, how would they get started?
Yeah, so if you want to get started with this strategy and learn about the 4 different strategies within rent to social housing, then you can go to kennypitman.com, check out the website. It's got all the information about different courses and things like that we offer. There's some free downloads in there as well. And then in the description of this video, there'll be a link to some free training that I've done about purely deal sourcing for social housing providers.
Yeah, so go do that. And if you want to see Dan and James's one of their latest deal where it was completely no money down and it was a back-to-back lease, go watch this video.